So the NAACP has launched a hashtag campaign. It's hashtag We Are Done Dying. And it was in response to not only the disproportionate of African Americans dying as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also dying as a result of police brutality at the hands of police. And the whole idea, of course, is to eliminate racial disparities here in this country. So we want to bring in Derrick Johnson. Derrick, you are the president of the NAACP. And the reason that I think this conversation will be very constructive is that I think there are a lot of people out there that know that change needs to come, but they don't know how to go about doing it. And what is great about the NAACP is that you have identified very specific changes that can occur in policing in this country that will solve this problem. So let's go through it. What are you asking the police departments in this country to do?
First of all, this is a national problem that will require a federal response. And for the NAACP, we recognize that to get the appropriate federal response, it's going to be in the November election. We need to have federal legislation to do away with qualified immunity. We need to have a certification process where police are recertified each year, just like you would be if you was a doctor. The records of police officers who've been involved with certain incidents need to be publicly disclosed and not hid under a police union contract. But this is a national problem. It's going to require a federal response. We have to disconnect the district attorney offices in so many areas from the police department so that if there is an incident, that the district attorney can do the investigation and not feel as if they are beholden to the police department. For African Americans, we have known this to be a problem for many, many years. What we're seeing now is the cell phone cameras are actually capturing what people have talked about for generations.
One of the things that has been really interesting to see from the NAACP, Derrick, as you know, is Sherilyn Ifill, who is responsible for the NAACP Legal Fund, has an amazing article out where she breaks down how to dig in specifically into police reform. And she talks about union contracts and qualified immunity, federal funding versus local funding, and the infrastructure that upholds systemic racism. Can you break that down for our audience who hasn't had the opportunity to read Ms. Ifill's comments?
But if you understand that many police departments rely on federal funding, so that within itself take much of the opportunity to implement a progressive change. We have to put into public policy federal legislation in order for police departments to receive funding. One, you cannot bury bad police behavior in union negotiated contracts. That has been a systemic problem. Qualified immunity gives police officers a heightened opportunity not to be held accountable. So in this case, but for the video camera, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, those police officers would have tried to hide behind a qualified immunity, a court-imposed doctrine that put the police above the law, even if police officers are operating at a level of lawlessness. There are very simple approaches we can address this question with. The problem we are facing in this country is having the political will to get it done. We think we have that political will in the House. We're almost for sure we have it with the leadership of Speaker Pelosi. Is lacking the political will in the Senate and definitely lacks the political will in the White House. So November is going to be the key for us to change the direction we have been going in this country to a more positive direction so communities can be actually protected and served and police officers are part of the community and not feeling as if they have to be aggressive and over-police African-American communities.
I think that is a really incredible advice. I think that people are looking for something to do besides protesting, and that is the next step. It's about where you put your ballot. But I want to ask you about some of the other cases. Of course, George Floyd is kind of like the case that springboarded all of this, but it was because, the country was still reeling from Ahmaud Arbery and still reeling from Breonna Taylor. Ahmaud Arbery, the suspects in his case, we saw a preliminary hearing yesterday. But what about Breonna Taylor? The officers involved in that case, they have not been charged. Do we know what's going on with that case and what the NAACP is hoping for and doing?
But again, just like the Ahmaud Arbery case, it took uh, the state to step in and appoint a special prosecutor because the prosecutor in that case would not bring charges. The same thing we've seen happen in Minneapolis, but that's also the same thing that's happened in Louisville, Kentucky, where we have to decouple the investigation of police-involved behavior from the local district attorney. For whatever reasons there may be, there is a level of inaction by district attorneys when it's involving police behavior. If no one is policing the police, then the police become the lawbreakers, not the law keepers. And that's what we're seeing in all of these scenarios. Even in New York with Amy Cooper, nothing has been brought, no charges brought against her. And what she committed is a racial hate crime. She tried to deceive the police to arrest Mr. Cooper, no relations, and it could have resulted in a violent reaction from that police department towards him when you have a white woman screaming in the park that a black man is attacking her and he was simply bird watching. We have to change the way we look at policing in this country. I grew up in Detroit, 10 minutes from Windsor, Canada, and it would amaze me when I go across the bridge and the police officers simply didn't have guns. They were more polite. You felt safe with them and you felt safe because of them, and the environment there was different. We have to look at how we police in this country overall.
Derrick, let me ask you about what Anne-Marie mentioned in your introduction, the hashtag We Are Done Dying. Some of the demands that the NAACP has, a ban on the use of knee holes and choke holes as an acceptable practice for police officers. And I'm not even clear if when you hear a mayor or a police commissioner say that we don't teach knee holes or we don't teach choke holes, but does that mean that they're actually banned just because they don't teach them? Or so maybe you can clear that up for us. Also, you are demanding the use of force continuum for any police department in the country to ensure there are at least 6 level steps with clear rules on escalation with regards to suspects. And you want, more importantly, a citizens review board in municipalities to hold police departments accountable and to build public confidence. Those are some of the demands, but I'm really intrigued by the first one about the knee holes and the choke holes and whether or not they're used by police departments or taught by police departments, or are they not taught, but also they're not banned?
Well, many police departments have banned the use of that tactic. Many police departments have identified that to be a serious problem. But in this case, you have someone who wasn't even resisting an arrest. And to see the officer with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, his hands in his pocket looking around, there was some intent there. And so after meeting with African-American law enforcement officers across the country, these are some basic steps that should be put in place. Once a suspect is apprehended not resisting, that suspect should not be on the ground with any body part land on that suspect, particularly if they're not resisting arrest. That should be a ban. There should be an express prohibition against using that tactic. That's not the case for many police departments.
Derrick, I want to ask you a question that I have been asked, right? As people have watched the protests across the country, they heard the demand that the officer in Floyd's case be charged. And then he was charged. And then the charge was upgraded. And they said, well, what about the other officers involved? They should be charged. So now they have been charged as well. And I think, some people who are watching this unfold on the news may say, well, you got what you wanted. All of the officers have been charged. Why are you still in the streets? Can you explain, and you've touched on this through this whole conversation already, but if you were to answer that person, what would you say?
This is about Mr. Floyd's case, but it's much bigger than that. It is the state of relationships between the African-American community and law enforcement in this country. It is the state of racism in this country that has gone unaddressed for so many decades. For African Americans, we are done dying from all of the structural racial institutions that impose a heightened level of burden on African Americans. It's not just enough that you obey law officers. It's not just enough that you comply with any commands and you're not resistant. resisting arrest, there is this aggressive nature in which police officers address and deal with African American communities. But it's throughout our system. We are at a higher rate of death as a result of COVID-19, not because the virus is looking for us, it's because all of the underlying issues that confront African American community because of the gap in access to health care. When you look at education, you can go on and on and on. We did an article in The Guardian talking about all the areas in which the numbers for African Americans are unnecessarily accelerate in terms of our death rate because of structural racism. And unfortunately, this country must address that question. And it's good to see that we have a diverse set of individuals willing to take on the question now. So it is about Mr. Floyd, but it's about the structural racism that has taken place over decades in this country, only to be accelerated by the individual in the White House.
Derrick, let me ask you something that I think is important for our viewers to hear. There are people who will hear and see what the NAACP and many others across this country are calling for when it comes to policing, and they will take from that you want to do away with policing. And next time something happens to you or in your home, see if you like it if a cop doesn't show up. Or they'll take away from it that you're suggesting that every police officer is racist. But when you see videos like the one that has been circulating that we've reported on of an elderly gentleman in Buffalo, New York, being pushed to the ground by a group of police officers, and then those cops walking past them, and then the Buffalo police department or officials in Buffalo releasing a statement saying that the man tripped when evidence points to the fact that the man was pushed with a billy club by a police officer. I want you to, I guess the question is, or what I want you to highlight is the systemic structure that exists in police departments where oftentimes you will see African-American police officers exacting the same level of aggressiveness on individuals, both black and white, that white police officers exact. I mean, we're talking about a system and a structure, and I think people always want to take away from it the individual.
Yeah. So I use the example of Windsor, Canada, my experience growing up, to show that the way we look at policing in this country is an antiquated model not designed to protect and serve. It actually creates a level of militarized presence in many communities across the country. And unfortunately, that mindset, that culture, go across the race of the police officer, particularly when you have a bad actor. The video in Buffalo was horrific. Here you have an elderly white gentleman being pushed by a billy club, and the first response from the police force is he tripped, but everyone can see in plain sight what happened. We have to really look at the nature of policing in this country. Crime has been going down for over 30 years now. I'm talking about serious violent crime, but yet the escalation of how police officers are trained and use force has stayed the same. And we've seen it with Ferguson when you had these small police departments with military-type equipment, as if we were in war with the citizens they are sworn to protect and serve. We're not at war, and no one is saying do away with the police officers of the department. Many of them are my friends and members. We are saying the nature of how policing is carried out in this country is antiquated and is oppressive for too many communities.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Ferguson, Derrick, and as you know, Ferguson just elected its first black female mayor, Ella Jones, and I'm curious, this may be a little nuanced, but I think that we can do that here at CBSN, have nuanced discussions on very complicated subjects. The question is, once we talk about the need for diversity across all institutions, and that certainly is a desire in police departments, but oftentimes you see black police commissioners or black mayors and black police commissioners, and yet you still see some of the issues that we're talking about here. So the question becomes, what happens when somebody does ring that bell, somebody does make it to the mountaintop and becomes a person in control? But again, going back to my question about the infrastructure and the system, if you're in control or you're responsible for a system that some say is inherently biased or racist, how do you combat that?
So if we start looking at this, not about the individual, not about the elected official, but about the structure. We're talking about structural change, systemic change as a result of structural racism, structural aggressiveness. And so we have to completely deconstruct our notion of policing our communities and reconstruct it to fit where we are in today. We have less crime being committed. We have individuals who live in our community who join police forces, and that's a part of their profession. And we appreciate and we honor those who actually take that to heart. I've seen the most heartening video out of Flint, Michigan, when the protesters began to march and the county sheriff pulled up. He knew them. He said, hey, I'm here to protect you, not to cause force on you. And they start hugging, they start talking, and then they say, march with us. And so the sheriff in his department, they start marching with the protesters. You see, we've seen pictures where police officers taking the knee with the protesters. That's the type of community policing, the type of community relationship that we must have in order to move forward. But if we continue to train officers to see citizens as the enemy to the state, we're going to continue to get this kind of behavior. This is not about the individual. It's not about the elected official. It's about the structure. We need structural change to address structural racism that has been embedded in far too many police departments across the country.
Derrick Johnson of the NAACP. Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. We spent quite some time talking about this, but even with a discussion like this is one that will be ongoing, not just this week, not just next month, but for quite some time. And I'm glad you were able to come on and shed some light for our viewers here at CBSN. Thank you very much.
And if I can say, we got to march to the polls in November. We cannot make the structural changes necessary if we don't change the policymakers who are sitting in the seat, state, local, and federal. That has to happen. This is a great moment for this nation. Now let's continue the energy to November to make the change necessary. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Derrick. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Derrick Johnson, we appreciate it.